So what I've done primarily is what I'm calling policy analysis, which means that, you know, I'm not out there. I'm not meeting with people. I'm not meeting with members. I'm sort of trying to, I guess, create, the best way to think about it is sort of to critique or create policy proposals and try to get traction. Kind of try to make the best argument that you can, and then leave it to other people to try and let those arguments gain traction. So you know, so at AEI, what I mostly did was research for either academic papers or magazine articles or newspaper articles, and then I had the opportunity to write a few of my own too. That's something very different from what Piper does.
So Piper, why don't you talk about the distinction?
Yeah, so I do some research and I do some writing, but all the writing I do is very pointed with an angle of what policy I want to support or oppose. So I do white papers or reports that are done because we think that there's a chance to move some piece of legislation or some rule or guidance that this will help bolster. And in most cases, it will give it, you know, the data backup, but then also we can generate a ton of media attention. We can change public perception. We can persuade a decision maker to do what we want them to do because we have put it in the public forum and we've gotten, you know, opinion pieces, or we've gotten the media to cover it in their district or in something that they care about. So in that way, I think the research element of my job is very different. And then obviously my job encompasses a lot of different things. Whether it's the actual lobbying or the media work, you know, I sit down with reporters every week and pitch them on stories and try to get them to cover what I want them to cover because the media is one of the most powerful tools that we have. And then, yes, I work a lot with different coalition partners and try to build power that way.
Mm-hmm. And would it be fair to say that all three of you are involved in doing things, but largely that you're policy advocates and analysts and advocates, and that what you're doing is trying to persuade the people who are actually the policy makers, at least on the national level?
I think there's a lot of overlap. In my case, yes, I've been in rooms where I'm literally writing the legislation with them. I'm saying you should not say shall, you should say may, or telling them what they should write. Because it's not the members of Congress that actually write the legislation.
Who does?
It's their staff.
It's the staff.
And their staff write it with, you know, powerful groups or groups they find important. So when they're writing a clean water bill, I and some other clean water people will come in. They will then also have that exact same meeting with the farmers or our opposition or whoever we're going up against, and they will try to persuade them to change words or add, you know, different subsections.
Mm-hmm.
And we all go back and we'll say, no, that is, you can't do that. And so it's a tug of war in some cases, or in some cases you'll literally write the legislation with the staffer, but you'll do most of the writing and give it to them, and then they'll move forward with it.
And Alissa, do you have a comment on this policy advocacy versus policy making?
Yeah, I actually will second a lot of what Piper has said, and that will admit that before I worked in DC, I mean, I knew that staffers were very powerful and they did a lot, but I had no idea exactly how much they did. And so, yeah, that you'll have meetings with people where they will be trying to figure out what they should be putting into legislation. And, you know, what you're saying, depending on what stage they are in creating the legislation, may be actual language or may, like, really kind of steer them in one direction or the other in terms of the focus or the scope of the legislation. Mm-hmm. And so, but I mean, a lot of what we did was advocacy, but then there's a lot of what you do that is actually helping to create the momentum.
But and where your work, but where your work comes together with public policy making is really with those staff members on the Hill.
And also, with like when we met with the National Security Council, the director on Iraq.
Yeah.
And, so that's not necessarily legislation, but that's, the implementation
Right.
of a strategy. And because we had someone on our staff who was just extremely knowledgeable and connected in Iraq, and, who could come and say, hey, look, here's what happens when you do this, here's what happens when these other things are happening. These are some things that we'd like you to think about. And they were able to go and kind of vet it through their own people and take those ideas. So,
Right.
whether it's on the Hill or in other organs of the government, yeah.
Right, and another person that ought to be on this panel, and if we do this again, we'll make sure we get one if there is an Amherst person doing this right now, is a congressional staffer, either from a personal staff of a senator or a representative or a committee staffer.
Yeah.
And these people range in age from your all age, right out of college, all the way up to people who have made a career out of it and have graduate degrees. And in my business, where I interact with these people on Capitol Hill, I always come away very impressed with often people who are very junior, but very knowledgeable and have a lot to do with policy making on the Hill. So that's another way in which you all can think about being involved is we're talking today with 3 people from really the private sector of policy analysis and making, but there's also the directly the public sector. And on the national level, that's really headquartered in Washington, working for committee staff or a senator or a representative.